Hi friends, welcome back to our art project. We're doing Pointillism fruit. This is a project that's in 4 lessons and you have to watch the lessons in sequence. This is lesson 3. So let's go over what you're going to need for this lesson. You'll need your fruit study that you've done with the base color all filled in. You'll need your original fruit handy so that we can refer to it. You'll need your bottles of acrylic craft paint, 3 primaries, red, yellow, blue, and your 3 secondaries, orange, purple, and green, and you'll need white. You'll need a whole bunch of cotton swabs, some waxy coated paper plates, and some napkins or some paper towels. Okay, we've been working on a really cool project based on the work of the post-impressionist French artist Georges Seurat. And Seurat was a young artist who was fascinated with color theory, the science behind color, and why our eyes perceive color the way that we do. And so he developed a technique where the mixing of colors occurs on the canvas by placing colors next to each other rather than by mixing colors in a palette. And this was a really new idea. And the technique that he developed is pointillism, where you're just making small points or dots of color to fill the canvas. And pointillism takes a lot of time and patience, but it can achieve a really neat effect. And that's what we're working on together, Pointillism fruit. Now, in talking about color theory, it's important as we go to this next step, we already have our base color applied of our fruit, but now we need to make that fruit look realistic in 3D. Right now it looks very flat. And in order to do that, we have to add in some additional dots of color. But what colors to add? And this is where your understanding of color theory is so important. So if you look back up to our color wheel, you see that we have our 3 primaries, and in between them are the secondaries. And you'll notice these 3 colors on this side of the wheel are what we call our warm colors. And we'll be making a palette of warm colors. That's yellow, orange, and red. And these 3 colors are our cool colors, green, blue, and purple. And we talk a lot more about colors and color theory in our art class series, Art Class 1, so you can always check that out. Now, you recall with our painting that we're using as our sample here, the Seine at Le Grand Jatte, this is a Seurat, and we see this beautiful river, the River Seine, that is primarily blue, and that is our base color, and that's what we added on our fruit. But if I look at all that's going on here, there's a lot of dots of a lot of color. And so Seurat had to make some choices about the colors that he put in there in order to achieve the shimmering water and the idea of sunlight playing through the foliage and shade and shadow and sun on the grassy front. So if I look just at this section of grass in the very front, you would say the grass is green. But in addition to green dots, Seurat added a lot of blue and yellow. Now blue and yellow make green, but depending on where he placed those dots, where there's a concentration of yellow on top of green, it looks like the sun is hitting the grass. And where there's a concentration of blue on the green, that's where you're seeing some shadow from another object on the lawn. So understanding the color theory and mixing is really important. But it's really important to know what happens to color when other colors are placed next to it. So I told you before that Seurat investigated the work of this Ogden Rood, who was a chemist, and he's the one who posited the theory that your eye perceives color differently. It tells your brain what color it is, but it's actually 2 colors next to each other. Now, in the textile industry, this was causing a problem in the late 19th century. There was a man named Chevreul who noticed the same thing as the head of dyeing at a tapestry firm. And what was happening was certain threads were being put next to each other, such as complementary colors, orange and blue. But when the threads were tiny and those threads were next to each other, from a distance they looked awful, very dull and gray. Well, that's because when 2 complements are mixed, it comes out brown or gray. So an orange thread next to a blue thread was not enough concentration of that color. When they were close together, seen from a distance, the colors were very dull. So in recognizing this, Chevreul came to the same exact theory that Ogden Rood did. He was looking at it in terms of paint. Chevreul was looking at it in terms of fibers, but they recognized that certain colors should not be right next to each other. They looked totally different from a distance. Seurat was fascinated by that. Now, another artist that was really studying the impact of color a little bit later than Seurat was Vincent van Gogh. If you look on our color wheel, you'll see that blue is opposite of orange. That means they're color complements. They're opposite on the color wheel. Van Gogh knew that. He made this sky in Café Terrace a very vivid blue and balanced it against this golden orange cafe wall because he wanted both colors to really pop. Because he had read as well that when complementary colors in large chunks, large amounts, are next to each other, each color becomes more vibrant. But when you put smaller swatches, smaller application of complementary color together, like Chevreul discovered in that tapestry factory, it looks duller. Down here in the cobblestones, in order to show the grayish brown street, Van Gogh used the same colors, the golden orange and the vivid blue, and made small strokes to show the cobblestones. So knowing how colors respond to each other is an important part of this project. So how are we going to proceed with our fruit? Well, we're going to set up two palettes, and one is going to have our warm colors and one is going to have our cool colors. So we're going to start off with our warm colors, and don't put out too big of a puddle, my friends, because we're just working with small dots and we don't want to waste paint. So I'd say no bigger than the size of a quarter. Our warm colors are yellow, orange, and red. Spread them out in like a triangle on your plate. And then your cool color palette will have your primary blue and then your two secondaries of green and purple. Now I have my cotton swabs ready, and I have a paper towel or napkin handy to collect my dirty cotton swabs. The first thing I need to do is to fix my pear. And when I say fix, we know that we have our base colors of green, yellow, and red, but I can see that that pear is kind of far off from this green here, which is a pure hue of green. That pear is actually closer to a yellow green. So I'm going to add yellow dots right on top of my green dots. Now I still want green dots to show through, my friends, but in order to get that right shade, I need to add a lot of yellow dots. So first I'm going to use my cotton swab to spread out my puddle so it's not thick. Remember we did that last time? And I'm going to kind of all over, right on top of where I did green, do yellow so that I can make this now yellow-green. If you happen to have a green pear, as I do, try to leave your edges green and make the yellow dots that you're doing right on top kind of in the interior. So I'm just putting a lot of dots on top. I'm not smashing my swab and I'm not dragging it. Now some of my dots might seem more intense yellow than others, and that's okay. We're going to be building up layers, as I talked about, of color to achieve that 3D effect we want with our pear. Now, here's where we're going to start looking at our actual fruit arrangement more. Once we've laid the base color and we need to add in the additional colors, I'm going to be constantly referring to my real thing, my model, the still life that I have set up here. Because as I look at it, I can see there's some highlight, some shadow, there's even some reddish orange in that pear. So look at your fruit to see what it really looks like. Do you remember I told you about the size of Seurat's first major works? 7 feet by 10 feet. They were meant to be seen from a distance because they were so huge. That's important to know, friends, as we're working on this. Every once in a while, you're going to need to step away from your work and look at it from a distance. And that's where the eye really will do the optical mixing. It's very difficult when you're this close. You're seeing individual dots of color. Anytime during this project, if you feel that you need a little bit more time to do your pointillism, simply pause the DVD, and when you're ready to catch up with me, turn it back on. And now, while that is doing a little bit of drying, before we move on, I'm going to go to my apple. Now, I can see by looking that this is a very cherry red, very bright red, whereas my real apple is much darker and has a lot more purple tones to it, a deeper shade of red. So I need to add some other dots that will pull out that purple darker tone. Well, the way you make purple, according to our color wheel, is to add red with blue. So the first place I'm going to start is by adding blue dots. So take cotton swab, spread out my puddle so it's not too thick. I'll use the other end to get a nice clean dot. And I'm looking carefully at my apple. Because of the shine on the apple, the upper portion is going to stay fairly light, so I'm going to concentrate at the bottom. So I already have a lot of red dots, and I don't want this to turn into a purple apple, so I'm not going to make my blue dots very close together. I'm going to stagger them, and they're going to be small throughout the red. Now I know you're going to probably say to yourself, oh, this doesn't look right. It probably doesn't look right when you're up close, and it doesn't look right now because we're still working, but I promise you it will look right. So along the bottom of my apple is resting, and as I look, I can see that it's darker. I need to make it look darker by adding these blue dots. Now here's the fun thing about layering in pointillism. If you're not happy with how concentrated your dots are, you can go back with the red. So I'm adding blue dots, and I'm looking, and I can see, especially where my apple touches my banana, it's much darker. So I'm placing the dots where it's definitely a darker red. And along my left side is a much darker, it's in more shadow where my highlights are. So along that side, every here and there, I'm placing a blue dot. Now, I want to add some more shading to that apple. And this is where the warm and cool colors is really important. When you're trying to show that something is in shadow, you add a cool color, blue, green, or purple. And that's exactly what Sarah did here. Let's look at this tree. This is a beautiful tree, and we're not quite sure what variety it is, probably a river birch. But you'll notice that the trunk looks very yellow-white where it's in strong sunlight. But here, where Sarah is trying to show that the foliage, this portion of the trunk is in shade, he added all purple. Well, the tree is not purple. Have you ever seen a purple trunk tree? It's probably gray or tan or brown. Along this riverbank, you'll see that it looks whitish along the line. White and yellow were added to show strong sunlight that is bouncing off of this riverbank. And within the foliage, you'll see darker blue and purple added to show where the leaves are in shadow. So cool colors are used for shadow, and warm colors are used to show when something is in light. That's why you made your palettes a warm color palette and a cool color palette. So I have this blue, but it's not quite enough, so now I'm going to add some other cool colors. So I'm going to start with purple. Now purple is what is made when you add blue and red. So we already have some of that going on. But the addition of this cool color creates an even deeper tone of red. And I'm looking at my apple. It kind of almost appears like this particular variety of apple is kind of stripy. So I'm going to add some, using my purple dots, kind of some marks in a little bit of a row because this kind of apple skin looks a little stripy. And I also can see that there's a dip in the apple where the stem comes out, and so that area up there is a little darker, so I'm going to add some dots up there. I'm taking time to carefully observe. I keep looking at my apple, and that is my guide for where the areas are darker or lighter. Now the smaller the dots you make, the greater the level of detail you can get in your painting. I'm going to take one of these napkins and make sure my hand, you want to always check your hands, friends. Your hand might drag into some paint. You've always got to watch that. Try and keep off the surface of your painting and always check so that you don't drag color that you don't want through something else. So now I'm going to add a third cool color, green, which happens to be the complement of red. Now, this is an important part of color theory. Remember when we learned what happened at the textile factory, right? Where a very small amount of a complement were next to each other, it blended optically to be a dull gray or brown. And that's what Van Gogh did in the cobblestones outside of Cafe Terrace. He wanted it to look duller. It was a street, and he put small strokes of orange near small strokes of blue. Well, green happens to be the color complement of red. So I have to be careful that I don't put too much. I don't want this to look brown, but I do want to show that there's some deeper tones in shadow. See, a lot of people think to add shade or shadow, you add black. The Impressionists never used black in their work. They always did things by using a combination of all the cool colors or color complements. And so they would even achieve brown by mixing the color complements, not by using the actual brown. We're just going to use our straight colors here. So can you see how that's changed already, friends, by adding those cool colors at the bottom? Now we're not finished yet. Remember, we do pointillism in layers. I don't want to get too far with my apple because I want to kind of see how it works against the pear and the banana, and then I'll add another layer after that. So my banana looks incredibly flat compared to my apple. And if you look closely at a banana, friends, it's actually sections where you peel that kind of make that side a little flat. It's not perfectly cylindrical. It's kind of got these edges based on the skin. So when I look at my banana, I can almost kind of see a line where the two sections of peel meet, and I want to kind of create that line, but I don't want to draw a line on my banana. So in order to get that kind of brownish dull color, I'm going to use the color complement. Now we know, based on our color wheel, the color complement of yellow is purple. Now I know this might scare you a little bit to put purple on your banana, but trust me, your eye will do the optical mixing. It all depends on the size of the dot and how close they are together. If you have a banana that has sections and we want to create some color and dimension to the banana, you're going to take a swab. We already have spread out our purple, and you're going to be very careful to get a very small dot on the end of your swab, and I can see where there's a section, and so I'm going to actually do very small dots kind of far apart. They're not going to be very close to each other. Because I don't want it to look like a very solid line. I'm just doing a little bit of the purple. Purple is the complement to yellow. And because when you mix complements in small amounts, your eye perceives it as the dull brown or gray. So that will work. But I can also see at the bottom of the banana, the shade of yellow changes as you go around the form. So at the bottom here, I'm also going to do the color complement, which is purple. Kind of spread those dots out a little bit. The closer you place your dots, the more concentrated the color, and so your eye will see it differently. So I'm placing purple dots along here, and I actually am going to put them a little closer because I'm looking at my banana and that color is duller there as it goes around. So I'm adding more purple dots. You're thinking, oh, Miss Pat, why are you doing that to that yellow banana? But it will work, promise. Now this is actually a golden yellow, not as lemon yellow as this color. So in order to make that golden color, I'm going to add some orange, which is right next to it on the color wheel. So I'll get a new swab. So again, my dots will not be super close together and will not be big. So along this bottom section, right on top of the purple, every here and there, I'm adding some orange dots. Well, I see a lot of green in that banana too, so I have to go back and do some green. Now I'm leaving this main middle section of the banana, that more pure yellow hue. I see lots of little freckles. So the purple will be used for that as well. I see a lot of green on the end of that banana. If you have a banana, you might see a lot of green too, depending on how ripe that banana is. So I'm keeping my dots a little spread apart, but I'm adding them so I can get that green. So I'm going to go back to my purple, and I'm going to add in a lot of small concentrated dots. And then I'm just going to take some more yellow right on top because that will mix and that will look like brown on that end. I see a lot of green on that stem, so I'm going to add some more green. I'm not going to worry too much about highlights. We're going to do that on our last lesson. There's a little bit of green going on up here. You know, it takes a lot of practice to really observe. That's the best tip I can give you for when you're doing any type of drawing or painting, is spend time really observing, really looking. Have you ever spent time looking at a spider web in detail? All those amazing threads, or how the dew will be caught onto the web. A beautiful flower or even a leaf. Spend the time to look. It's not always easy to see. You know, that reminds me of a verse I want to read to you from Deuteronomy. That's in the Old Testament. This is from Deuteronomy 4:9. This is Moses speaking. Only be careful and watch yourselves closely so that you do not forget the things that your eyes have seen, or let them fade from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and to their children after them. See, what was happening was, after Moses brought the Israelites out into the desert in the Promised Land, the Israelites had forgotten about all the amazing things they had seen that God had done for them, miracles, all the things that he had done back in Egypt when he rescued them from the Pharaoh. They'd forgotten about them. Have you not thought about the things that you've seen? And Moses was trying to remind them, you need to talk about this with your children, talk about it with your grandchildren, because God has done some pretty amazing things. He's made some amazing things. So when you really see what God has done, it fills your heart with joy, and you realize how awesome God is and what he does. Now, what about you? When God does something amazing in your life, or you see something amazing, do you tell your family about it? Do you tell your friends about it and give God the glory? That's what the lesson is from Moses here. All right, so we put in some of the darker tones in our apple to get it to be more dimensional, and in our banana. Now, what about our pear? Well, we fixed our color so that our base color is now a yellow-green, but I'm looking at that pear and I see specks of orange and red and certainly blue in the shaded parts. So I'm going to take some blue at the base of that pear when it's in shadow, because it's tucked behind that apple and the banana. I'm going to add in some blue dots, not super close. I don't want it to turn to a blue pear, but my eye will perceive that cool color in there and know that that's in shade. And so I look over and I'm very, oh, I see when it's up against the apple, that's really in shade. So I'm going to want to add several layers of cool colors there where it's behind the apple. So I'm going to add in just a little bit of purple, staggered, not too close together. Well, it still seems a little bright to me for something that's in shadow. So I'll add the color complement. I'll add some red. And by adding in the color complement to the green, it dulls down that color a little bit so it doesn't stand out so bright, but still looks like it's in shadow. Now, I see a lot of orange and red in that pear, but it's not a strong, intense color. So I'm going to add a little bit of dots, but not very big dots and not a lot of them and not too close together. But it's kind of on this right side. There's like a little blush of red coming down on the pear. So, and there's a little bit over here as it's on this side up against the apple. So what we've done so far is we've tried to make our fruit more dimensional, but how do you check? Just like Seurat did these large works and he had to step back. So here's what I want you to do, my friends. I want you to take your painting so far and I want you to step away from it. Get out of your chair or your desk or your table, prop it up against a bottle or have a friend hold it for you and step away and see, are you getting the color mixture, the optical mixing that you like? Is it dark enough in the spots that you need it to be dark? Does the color need to be more intense and richer? And you'll make those decisions so the next time we're together, we're going to be adding in our highlights and our shadows as we finish up our pointillism fruit. See you for the next lesson.